Produced by Elton John and David Furnish, Hating Peter Tatchell documents human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell's fight for LGBT rights. His mission has led him across the globe, including Russia.
Up a placard highlighting the plight of gay men in Chechnya.
Peter Tatchell didn't feel that he was breaking the law.
Who was detained has been released today.
He joins us now.
Under President Putin, there has been a long...
My protest was about the criminalisation of LGBT equality.
Just as I hoped, it stole Putin's thunder. I want the story not to be just about Russia hosting the World Cup. It's put LGBT rights in the headlines around the world.
Peter Tatchell joins Free Speech Nation now. Are you there, Peter?
I'm here and very glad to join you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on the documentary. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Just before we get on to the documentary, I just want to ask you, did you hear the conversation I had with Debbie Hayton just now? And I just wondered if you did hear that, whether you had any thoughts about what she said.
I heard only a tiny fraction, so I think perhaps we'll talk about that after this section. Yeah?
Absolutely. Let's not put you on the spot. I don't expect you to know something that you can't possibly know. But anyway, well done on the documentary. I'm very interested to know how this came about. Now, obviously, you have been a campaigner for 54 years, I believe, and you moved from Australia early in life after campaigning against the Vietnam War. Did you always know that you wanted to devote your whole life to activism, or is it something that you just kind of fell into?
It was never an ambition. My first love was art and design, but I had a social conscience. I was concerned about a whole range of social issues, not just LGBT plus rights, but many other issues as well. And I suddenly found that I got rather good at it. And sort of one success encouraged me to go for the next success. So it was a slow process, but I have really devoted pretty much the last 40 years of my life full time to trying to champion a fair deal for everyone in our society, not just LGBT plus people, everyone.
Yes, I should emphasise this, that your work is for human rights generally, wherever that you perceive it. And it's interesting in the documentary, there's a point about where it talks to your inspiration, your earliest inspiration, being an attack in Alabama, the bombing by a white racist of a black church, and 4 black girls were murdered in that attack. So, so when people describe you as a gay activist, do you think that's a bit reductive?
It is. It's narrowing what I do. You know, I have championed so many different causes over the last 5 decades. And one thing about this film, which has really been brought out, is a lot of the responses from people who've seen it say that I never realized, first, for how long you've been campaigning, and secondly, for how many different diverse causes you have championed. And yeah, I've got to say that the responses have been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, people say, you know, I never knew you did that. I never knew that you were the person who started this campaign. Well, so I think it's been an education as much as an entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, some people will remember your attempted citizen's arrest on Robert Mugabe, and that was there were 2 instances of that for, of course, his perpetuation of torture, and that's an incredibly courageous thing to do. Sometimes, however, am I right in saying that human rights can brush up against each other? I mean, and I know, for instance, that you've made a point of campaigning against homophobia within extreme conservative Islam, for instance, and that could surely get you into trouble there. Would you say that those kind of conflicts concern you at all?
Well, absolutely. But, you know, we have to challenge human rights abuses wherever we find them. You know, we can't be selective. And some of the criticisms I've come in from some people on the left is that they don't like the way in which I call out Muslim extremists who are homophobic, who think that women should be denied equal rights, who are anti-Semitic, and so on. They think I'm colluding with Islamophobia. But of course, I am not attacking Muslim people. I am calling out bigots who want to harm other people, including, I may say, other Muslims. Many of these extremists who are homophobic and anti-Semitic, who are misogynistic, they're also against other Muslims who hold more liberal progressive views or who don't share their hardline interpretation of Islam. So a lot of my work has actually been to defend Muslims who are themselves under attack from other Muslims who are extremist fanatics.
So in a sense, you're holding everyone to the same standards, irrespective of who or what they are.
I am an equal opportunities human rights defender. I don't pick and choose. I've defended Christian street preachers who've been arrested for, preaching in the street that homosexuality is wrong. Now, obviously, I disagree with them, but I defend their right in a free society to express their point of view. Freedom of speech isn't just for those who agree with me or you, it's for everyone. So, I've even testified to defend in court Christian street preachers who've been arrested on public order charges simply for saying that homosexuality is immoral. Now
this is
I wish they didn't hold that view, but they've got a right to hold that view if they wish.
Well, I remember as a child seeing a preacher on the street corner screaming about all gay people are going to burn in hell, and it's not a pleasant thing to hear, but I do sort of think they have that right to express themselves as they see fit. But does it concern you at all that a lot of activists in over the past few years, I would say particularly, actually take a very different view from you? I mean, a lot of particularly LGBT activists would say that they mistrust free speech, that they actually think that there do need to be curbs on free speech from the state and an expansion of hate speech laws. Does that concern you at all?
Well, it does, but I think it goes both ways. I think there are people on the left and the right who would like to restrict free speech. But I can tell you this, you may not know, but some years ago, I worked with a coalition to reform the Public Order Act 1986. Under that legislation, even merely insulting another person was a criminal offence, and you could be convicted for it. So I and others thought this was wrong. We wanted to change it. So what we did is we built together a broad coalition, which included Conservative members of Parliament, who I normally would disagree with, but who believe in free speech. And together, this broad alliance of Christians who were liberal, right-wing Tories, secularists, humanists, my own Peter Tatchell Foundation and others, we persuaded the government to ditch that law. So by coming together, despite our differences, we ended that restriction on free speech, which had been imposed by Margaret Thatcher under the Public Order Act in 1986. So there's a good example of how we should be working together to challenge left or right, whoever's trying to restrict free speech. And I think, the best way to deal with bigoted ideas is not by no platforming people or banning them. It's by open debate, by showing why they're wrong, producing counter evidence, and protest against them by all means. I've said, to some people, we need to protest against these people. Don't ban them, protest against them, show why they're wrong, produce the counter evidence. That's the best way to change bad, bigoted ideas.
So what would you say, though, to some of your critics who would say, well, in a sense, you kind of contributed to this current climate where people think we should shut down other people's views rather than protest or debate them? They would maybe cite, as the documentary does, your outrage campaign, where you outed bishops against their will because you felt they were being hypocritical. I mean, do you feel that form of activism was appropriate? Do you regret it in any way?
Well, we were not silencing those bishops. We weren't saying they should be denied free speech. We were simply protesting against them. And they weren't named because they were gay and in the closet. They were named because they were part of a homophobic church. They were colluding with the church's homophobia, which wasn't merely saying that homosexuality is wrong and sinful. The church at the time was saying that gay people should be denied equal rights in law, that we were morally inferior to heterosexual people, and that the law should discriminate against us in employment, in partnership rights, in childhood and parenting. These were really shocking examples of the church seeking to harm our community. So we only named those bishops because, first of all, they were colluding with homophobia, and secondly, they were being hypocritical. And the attacks upon me and outrage over that were themselves hypocritical.
So not
the very
repentance.
same people who said we were wrong were people
Peter.
who were saying if a Tory MP preaches family values and then has a mistress in an adulterous affair, they should be outed. They should be named.
But do you accept that they too?
Something similar.
do you accept that they too could be said to be victims of the homophobic system? That's the reason why they were in the closet in the first place.
Well, no, because these were mature, intelligent people. We and others had tried to negotiate with them and to, persuade them to stop their homophobia for many, many years. It didn't work. And so naming them was a last desperate measure. We didn't want to do it, but we felt it was necessary, and it had a very positive result. As
Thank you,
far as I
Peter.
know, none of those bishops ever again aligned with the homophobic church. The Church of England actually set up a dialogue with the lesbian and gay Christian movement for the first time, and the House of Bishops issued a very strong and very praiseworthy declaration against homophobic discrimination. So we had 3 wins out of that campaign.
Peter, I'm going to have to stop you there because we've got to go to a break. That's really fascinating. We're going to come back to you straight after the break. So we'll take a quick break now. Peter Tatchell will be staying with us. Welcome back. You're watching Free Speech Nation. Peter Tatchell's still with us. Hello, Peter. I wanted to ask you about your early activism. You were one of the organisers of the first ever Gay Pride March in 1972. How was that?
Well, the idea came about because back in those days, the predominant social view was that we should be ashamed of being gay. So that's why we came up with the idea of gay pride, that we were proud of being gay, weren't ashamed. It had never been done before, so it was a huge gamble. But in the end, about 700 to 1,000 people turned out for that march, which we're going to replicate in a version on the 24th of July, by the way. And that was a great relief because we didn't have any idea how many people we'd get. In those days, most LGBT plus people were closeted. They wouldn't dare reveal their sexuality because they feared rejection by their families, being sacked by their employer, being refused housing or evicted by their landlord, and so on. So it was a brave thing to do, and we got 700 to 1,000 very brave souls.
So, given that it's escalated beyond, I mean, I've been in the centre of London during Pride these days, and it's impossible to get anywhere. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people. A lot of them aren't part of the LGBT community at all. So it's just expanded out. Is there any sense when you started this back in early 1970s that you could have anticipated the changes that come about? The fact that we've got same-sex marriage. I mean, even did you think this would happen?
Well, I can remember at the age of 17 in 1969, calculating that it would probably take about 50 years to win legal equality in Western countries like Britain. Now, that was just a guesstimate, but it turned out just about right. I knew it was going to take a long time, but I was in it for the long haul. Just as same as I've been in it for the long haul to ensure a better deal for working class people, for women, for black and ethnic minority people, for everybody who's been shut out of the mainstream, out of the fruits and enjoyments of a good life. And I'm so glad and proud to be part of that movement. And of course, it isn't just me, it's been tens of thousands of others, including, I want to say, a big thank you to our straight friends and allies who've walked with us on this journey to freedom. Thank you so much. Without your support, it wouldn't have happened.
I noticed that behind you you've got the Pride flag, which I also see at the moment splashed on all sorts of corporate merchandise and stores, and major corporations have really embraced it. I can't help but note that they didn't do this before the age of consent was equalised. They didn't do this before Section 28 was repealed or before equal marriage. Do you ever worry that there's something very cynical about the way that the corporate world has embraced Pride?
Well, of course, at one level, it's hugely welcome, and it does represent the mainstreaming of our community and our struggle for basic human rights. But it also does worry me because sometimes it feels like it's just corporate branding, it's PR, it's a bid to win over pink consumers, to get our pink pounds. Now, I hope that most of these employers and businesses don't think that way, but sometimes when you look at some of their practices outside of Pride Month, you have to wonder.
I mean, the footage of you attempting a citizen's arrest on Robert Mugabe is quite astonishing. And if people haven't seen it, then I recommend watching the documentary on Netflix. And because it just strikes me that you put yourself in these incredibly precarious situations. It doesn't look like you have any fear in those moments. And yet when I'm talking to you now, you won't mind me saying, you seem like a very mild-mannered, non-confrontational person. So how do you inhabit a role when you're in those situations? When you're in Russia, for instance, and of course, being on a gay protest in Russia could be life-threatening, potentially.
Well, I've got to say that my motivation is what drives me, and it's very simple. I love other people. I love freedom, justice, equality. I hate to see other people suffering. I think to myself, if I was being victimized, I would want someone to help me. So therefore, I feel a duty to help others when I see them suffering. So that's what motivated my attempted citizen's arrest of President Mugabe. I'd been contacted by human rights defenders in Zimbabwe who explained to me the scale of disappearances, detention without trial, torture, even murder by Mugabe's thugs. And it wasn't getting any international attention. No one seemed to give a damn. So I was driven by this passion to try and do something to bring world attention to what he was doing to his own black people. You know, black people who happened to disagree with him were being treated like they were criminals of the worst kind. So that's why I did these two citizens' arrests. One was in London in 1999, and the second one was in Brussels in 2001. But I've got to tell you, I was very, very afraid. You know, I really did fear, well, first of all, I'd get arrested and charged with very serious offences. And secondly, that his minders would probably try and beat me up. But somehow or other, my fear was overcome by the sense of a duty and responsibility to support those very brave defenders in Zimbabwe itself who were being tortured and who were being killed. I felt I've got to do something, even if it involves me taking a risk. And I just sort of gambled that, you know, with my British passport, with my having TV crews around, that would give me some protection. In the end, as you know, in Brussels, I was actually beaten unconscious by his bodyguards and suffered some eye and brain damage and have been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder for many years as a result. But I wouldn't want it to happen. I didn't want it to happen, but I would do it all again because those two actions helped get media coverage all over the world about Mugabe's human rights abuses. And for people in Zimbabwe, that was so important.
So it's interesting that the principle, in a sense, outweighed the fear that you would have had. Absolutely fascinating. And we're going to be talking to Peter a bit later on, and that will go out on the Free Speech Nation podcast channel. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.